Lesson 96, Battle of Badr. The Great Battle of Badr. Quraysh used to go to Asham, the Levant, Greater Syria, for trade. During such a trip, they used to pass by Al-Madinah. One of these trips was in the month of Jumada of the year 2 AH after Hijrah, when their largest caravan was led by Abu Sufyan ibn Harb, accompanied by more than 30 Qurayshis. The news reached the Muslims in Al-Madinah, so they found it a good opportunity to take back some of what Quraysh confiscated from them when they migrated from Mecca to Al-Madinah. The Prophet, peace be upon him, went out to meet them, accompanied by 150 men from Al-Muhajirin immigrants. However, he could not catch up with them. This expedition is called Al-Ashira, after the name of a valley near Badr. Later, when the Prophet, peace be upon him, heard that the caravan was on its way back, he decided to meet up with it. Therefore, in one of the first 10 days of Ramadan, the Prophet went out again to capture the caravan. There were 314 men from the Al-Muhajirin emigrants and Al-Ansar supporters. The Muslims had 2 horses and 70 camels. When Abu Sufyan cautiously approached Al-Hijaz, the western part of the Arabian Peninsula, he learned about the Muslim army and their intention. Therefore, he left the main route and took an alternative one, parallel to the coast. Then he sent a man to Mecca to ask Quraysh for help if they wanted to save their goods and profits. Quraysh prepared 950 men to march and meet the Prophet, peace be upon him, and his companions. The army of Quraysh included 100 horsemen and 700 camels. When the Prophet, peace be upon him, learnt about the huge army coming to face them, he gathered his followers and asked for their advice. They all agreed to march out to meet them. Approaching the valley of Badr, the Prophet, peace be upon him, was informed that Abu Sufyan had avoided them with the caravan, and that the army of Quraysh was behind the valley of Badr. After hearing that the caravan was safe, Abu Jahl sent word to the army that they should not return to Mecca until they reached Badr, that they should stay there and slaughter animals for food, that they should distribute the meat together with wine among other Arabs so that they would fear them and be wary of them. The disbelievers, polytheists' army, camped on the far side of the valley, whereas the Muslim army with the Prophet, peace be upon him, was on the near side. There was no water on the Muslim side. Therefore Allah sent down rain so that the Muslims could drink, and so that the earth would become more firm. This made it easy for the Muslim army to move. On the opposite side, where the Qurayshi army was, the ground had turned into mud. The Prophet, peace be upon him, and his army came to the nearest wet land near where Quraysh were camped, and ordered for a cistern to be built. He, peace be upon him, also ordered his army to destroy the wells behind. This way the disbelievers would lose hope of getting water from behind them. Then he allowed his followers to build a hut of palm branches where he could set up his headquarters. They did so and built it on an elevation overlooking the battlefield. On the morning of Tuesday, the 17th of Ramadan, in the year 2 AH, the 2 armies came face to face. The Prophet, peace be upon him, was setting up the ranks of his army until it was in order. Then he looked at Quraysh and said, O Allah, this is Quraysh who came here to challenge you with their arrogance and their horses. They also came to belie your prophet. O Allah, I pray for your victory, which you have promised me. From the opposing army of disbelievers, 3 came out to the middle of the battlefield for the first challenge. Utbah ibn Rabi'ah, his son Al-Walid, and his brother Shaybah. This was the custom of battles in the old times, where notable warriors from each side would step up for a one-to-one challenge at the start. In response, 3 of the Al-Ansar from the Muslim army went out to face them. The first 3 stubbornly refused this challenge, saying, We would rather fight someone more qualified, someone from our cousins, i.e. Qurayshis. And out came Hamza ibn Abdul Muttalib, Ubaidah ibn al-Harith, and Ali ibn Abu Talib to accept this renewed challenge. Hamza took on Shaybah, as Ubaidah took on Utbah, and Ali faced Al-Walid. While Hamza and Ali defeated their opponents, the third challenge ended up with Ubaidah and his opponent both seriously injured. Seeing this, Hamza and Ali helped Ubaidah win and carried him wounded back to their side. The injury was unfortunately too serious, and he passed away later. May Allah be pleased with him. The full-scale attack then started, and the Prophet, peace be upon him, came out of his hut encouraging his army by saying, Soon the gathering will be routed, and they will turn their backs. Then he picked up a handful of dust and threw it in the enemy's direction, calling, May confusion seize their faces, criticizing their ugly faces that were filled with hatred and disbelief. He then turned back to his companions and continued encouraging them, saying, Fight them with all your power. The battle was getting tougher and tougher, reaching its climax while the 2 sides engaged fiercely against each other. It seemed that the Muslims were greatly outnumbered, but Allah had his way of changing the odds. Being on Muhammad's side, Allah gracefully helped the Muslims and supplied them with the angels of victory, who were sent to fight by their side. Barely an hour passed before the enemies fled for their lives and the Muslims were victorious. The Muslims took 70 prisoners and killed 70 fighters, many of whom were from the Qurayshis' best men. As soon as the battle ended, the Prophet, peace be upon him, ordered that the Muslim martyrs, only 14, be buried, and that the dead among the disbelievers be thrown into the pit of Badr. The next thing the Prophet, peace be upon him, ordered was the collection of the winnings from the battlefield. He sent a messenger to the people back in Al-Madinah to pass on the news of victory. Upon returning to Al-Madinah, the Prophet, peace be upon him, distributed the booty between the returning soldiers, as well as the Muslims who stayed behind in the city for certain necessities, putting aside the share of those who were martyred to give it later to their heirs. After seeking the advice of his companions about the prisoners, the Prophet came to a decision. They were to be kept safe and traded with Quraysh for a ransom. Quraysh later started to send ransom money in return for the captives. The amount they paid ranged between 1,000 to 4,000 dirhams, a silver coin about 3.1 grams, per captive, depending on his rank in the tribe. Some of the captives were not so lucky and did not get ransomed, but the Prophet, peace be upon him, found the wise way out. He made it possible for the literate among them to pay their own ransom by teaching 10 Muslim children how to read and write. Among the captives was Al-Abbas ibn Abdul Muttalib, the Prophet's uncle. He was not exempt from paying ransom, even though he fought with the disbelievers against his own will. Al-Abbas later embraced Islam, but he did not announce it until the conquest of Mecca. Abul As ibn Urabi, who was Zainab's, the Prophet's daughter's husband, also was among the captives. Zainab sent her necklace to the Prophet, peace be upon him, as a ransom for Abul As's release. However, the necklace was returned to her, and the Prophet, peace be upon him, instead asked Abul As to allow Zainab to emigrate to Al-Medina in return for his freedom. Abul As fulfilled his promise after returning to Mecca. He embraced Islam before the conquest of Mecca. Only then did the Prophet, peace be upon him, allow Zainab to return to Abul As. There were a few prisoners of war who were released by the Prophet's generosity without a ransom, as in the case of Abu Azza al-Jumahi, who was released without ransom but with the promise to the Prophet, peace be upon him, that he would stop composing his poems against Islam. Once he was back in Mecca, he did not fulfill his promise. He was killed later after the Battle of Uhud. Among the dead of the enemy were Abu Jahl, Umayyah ibn Khalaf, Utbah and Shayba ibn Rabi'ah, Handala ibn Abu Sufyan, Al-Walid ibn Utbah, Al-Jarrah, Abu Ubaidah's father, who was killed by his son Abu Ubaidah. There were 14 Muslim martyrs from the Battle of Badr. Of them, 6 were from Al-Muhajirin and 8 from Al-Ansar. Some from Al-Muhajirin were Ubaidah ibn al-Harith and Umayr ibn Abu Waqqas. From the Ansar were Auf and Muawith, sons of Afra. They killed Abu Jahl. And Sa'id ibn Khuzaymah, who was one of the men who made the pledge of Al-Aqaba. This great battle concluded with the Muslims' victory against numerous odds. They were few in number against a huge mass of their enemy. This was one of the great proofs of Allah's support and care for the Muslims who were sincere in their will and filled with tranquility in their hearts. They also had complete trust in what the Prophet, peace be upon him, had promised them, victory and triumph. After this battle, respect and awe for the Muslims spread among the Arabs. The result for the Muslims was honor, appeal and might. Thanks be to Allah, Lord of Alameen, Lord of mankind, jinn and all that exists.